The auction ended, only the wounded and beaten woman remained, but one man paid for her. The sun barely rose above the horizon, painting the sky in pale shades of orange and pink, yet the warmth of the morning did not reach her. She felt nothing but a deep, hollow ache in her chest. Her body was bruised, her clothes torn, and her hair tangled from days of neglect. She had been forced into this life, and each day seemed heavier than the last. Yet somehow she had survived. Somehow she had walked through another day of fear, pain, and humiliation. The streets she had once known were now strange and cruel. The small village she had grown up in, full of laughter and childhood memories, seemed like a distant dream. She remembered the sound of birds in the morning, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, and the soft hand of her mother guiding her when she was scared. But all of that had been taken away. Now she was only a shadow, moving quietly from one dark corner to another, careful not to attract attention. Every step she took felt like it could be her last. The auction house stood at the edge of the city, a large building with high walls and iron gates. Inside, people crowded together, their voices loud and harsh, bidding for what they called property, but what were really human lives. She had been here before, and each time it had been worse than the last. The faces of the crowd were familiar, men and women with cold eyes, watching and choosing, never seeing the pain behind her own. Her turn came soon. She could feel it in the tension in the room, the sharp glances, the whispers behind her back. She stood silently at the corner, her body shaking not from the cold, but from fear. Each person who passed her by seemed to measure her worth in coins, ignoring the story in her eyes. She did not move, did not cry out, only lowered her gaze and breathed slowly to steady herself. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she forced herself to remember that she had survived worse. She had no choice but to be brave, because if she showed weakness, there would be no mercy. Memories flooded her mind. She remembered the day she was taken, the cold hands that pulled her from her home, the strangers' faces twisted in greed and cruelty. She remembered screaming for help, for someone, anyone, to come, but the streets were empty. Her cries were swallowed by the walls of the city, and she had been left to face the darkness alone. Her body had been hurt, but worse than that, her spirit had been tested. Every day since then, she had learned to hide her pain, to make herself small, to survive in a world that wanted to crush her. The other people in the room had their own stories, but she could not focus on them. She only saw her own reflection in the polished floors, in the cold eyes of the crowd. She saw someone who was afraid, yes, but also someone who refused to break completely. Her wounds were deep, both on her skin and in her heart, but her will remained. She clenched her fists under the folds of her torn clothing and whispered to herself that she would endure. One day, she promised silently, she would be free. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the hall, loud and commanding. He spoke of prices, of bids, of who would take whom, as if the people in front of him were objects to be sold, not humans with dreams, feelings, and memories. The room was filled with excitement, greed, and the clinking of coins, and she felt herself shrinking further into the shadows. She could hear the whispers of others, some pitying, most not. Some made jokes, cruel and thoughtless, about those who had been brought here, and she forced herself not to react. She had learned long ago that showing emotion could be dangerous. Her thoughts drifted to her family. She did not know if they were alive, if they had searched for her, or if they even remembered her. The images of her childhood flashed in her mind, the warmth of her mother's smile, the rough hands of her father teaching her to ride a bicycle, the laughter of her siblings as they played in the sun. That world felt so far away now, like a story someone else had told her. But even though it was gone, she held on to those memories. They were the last pieces of a life that had not been completely stolen. The crowd grew louder and the auction moved faster. People were claimed one by one, and she watched in silence as others were taken away, their faces pale with fear or resignation. She wondered what awaited them, and the thought made her stomach twist, yet she told herself not to despair. There was no use in giving up. It would not help her survive. She had survived this long by keeping quiet, by moving carefully, and by hiding her feelings. She had survived by holding on to hope, even when hope seemed impossible. Her gaze fell on a small corner of the room where the sunlight came in through a high window. It was warm, gentle, and almost tender, and for a moment she imagined herself walking into that light, leaving behind the darkness, leaving behind the fear. She did not move. The crowd, the noise, and the auctioneer's sharp voice brought her back to reality. She was not free yet. But that small beam of sunlight reminded her that the world was not entirely cruel, that maybe, somewhere, there was someone who would see her not as property but as a human being. Time seemed to stretch and bend around her. Each moment was heavy, each second a test of endurance. She could feel the exhaustion in her bones, the soreness in her muscles, the sting of bruises on her skin. Yet through it all, she kept standing. Her body was weak, but her heart refused to give in. She reminded herself that she had survived worse, that she had walked through darkness and come out alive. She was not defeated, not completely. And that thought gave her strength, even as the auctioneer called for the next bids and the room filled with tension once again. She noticed small details others ignored. The way a young boy clutched his mother's hand, the nervous glance of a woman whose turn was coming next, the cold smile of a man who seemed to enjoy the suffering around him. She watched carefully, learning, observing, and preparing herself for whatever might come. Every glance, every movement of the crowd taught her something about survival, about reading people, about finding even the tiniest chance to protect herself. Her thoughts returned to the idea of freedom. What would it feel like to walk outside these walls without fear? To feel the grass under her feet, the wind on her face, the warmth of the sun that did not just fall through a window. It seemed impossible, almost a dream, but she clung to it. She believed that somewhere someone might recognize her courage, someone might see the woman behind the wounds and choose to help her. That belief, small and fragile as it was, had carried her this far, and she would not let it go. The auction continued, and people around her moved closer or were taken away. She felt the tension building as her turn drew near. Her heart raced, not with excitement, but with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of pain, fear of losing even the little control she had left. But she also felt a quiet, stubborn hope. A hope that even in this dark place, something good could happen. A hope that she might not be alone in the world, that someone could care for her, for real and not for their own gain. And so she stood, bruised and beaten, trembling but unbroken. She watched the crowd, listened to the auctioneer, and kept her thoughts focused on survival and hope. She was a shadow, yes, but within that shadow was a spark of resilience, courage, and the desire to live. That spark had kept her alive through unimaginable pain, and it would continue to guide her, even in this cruel place. As the morning light shifted and the auction moved closer to its end, she whispered quietly to herself, a promise in the silence of her own heart: I will survive. I will see another day, and one day I will be free. Even in the midst of fear, humiliation, and darkness, she held on to that promise. She had nothing else, yet that small hope was enough. And with that hope, she continued to stand, silent and brave, ready for whatever the cruel world might throw at her next. The auction hall had grown louder as the morning passed, filled with voices that barked, laughed, and shouted over each other. The woman stood in her corner, her body aching, her spirit tense, yet her eyes remained watchful. She had learned to survive by observing, by noticing every detail that others ignored. The men and women in the room seemed more interested in numbers than in people. Each bid was cold, mechanical, a simple exchange of money for a human life. She could hear the clinking of coins, the scratching of pens on paper, the murmurs of approval and excitement. It was a world stripped of compassion, and yet she was forced to stand within it, silent, invisible, yet very much present. The first few people were taken quickly. Some went without resistance, their faces blank as if they had accepted their fate. Others struggled quietly, the subtle tremble of their bodies betraying their fear. She noticed the subtle differences, the way a person straightened their posture when they saw hope vanish, the way a hand twitched nervously as the auctioneer called for another bid. Each movement told a story, and she remembered every detail, storing it in her mind as if it might help her one day. She had learned long ago that knowledge could be as powerful as strength, and in this place, it might be her only weapon. Her thoughts wandered, unbidden, to the people who had been taken before her. Faces blurred in her memory, each one a reminder of the cruelty around her. There was a young girl, no older than 10, who had cried softly as she was lifted by a man she did not know. There was a woman with silver hair who had tried to hide behind her chair, only to be dragged out despite her protests. And there was a man who had refused to speak, his eyes filled with silent defiance as he was taken away. Each story haunted her, yet she forced herself not to despair. She had to remain strong, not just for herself, but for the fragile hope that somehow she could survive. The crowd around her seemed to exist in a different world. They laughed at jokes that were cruel and thoughtless, whispered about the qualities of the people being sold, and argued over prices as if they were buying objects rather than human beings. She could feel their eyes on her sometimes, judging her silently, calculating her worth. It was humiliating, terrifying, but she refused to let it break her. She lowered her gaze and focused on her breathing, counting the seconds, finding small moments of calm in a place designed to crush calm. She could feel the tension in the air as her turn drew nearer. The room seemed to close in around her, the noise and heat pressing down, making it difficult to think. She remembered the faces of her past, the moments of safety she had once known, and she clung to them in her mind. The warmth of her mother's hands, the laughter of children in the streets, the quiet evening skies she had watched before life had taken a cruel turn. These memories gave her strength. They reminded her that she had been human before, and she could still be human again. The auctioneer's voice cut through the noise like a knife. "Next," he called, pointing toward her. Her heart jumped and her knees threatened to buckle, but she held herself upright. She felt a tightness in her chest, a mixture of fear and determination. She had been here before, but each time was worse than the last. Each time the world seemed colder, more unforgiving. She reminded herself that she had survived so far. That survival was her strength, her secret weapon. She would endure no matter what came next. Around her, people began to place their bids, raising their hands, calling out numbers with excitement. She watched them carefully, noting their expressions, the quick movements of their eyes, the way they seemed to enjoy the process. She had learned to read people in this place, to understand them before they even spoke. Survival, she realized, was not only about avoiding harm. It was about understanding the minds of those around her, anticipating danger, and preparing herself for every possibility. Her mind wandered briefly to the idea of escape. She had thought of it many times before, imagining herself slipping quietly out of the auction house, running through empty streets until she found safety. But she knew that in reality, escape was nearly impossible. Guards patrolled the doors and the streets were watched. One wrong step, one careless move, and she would be dragged back. So she focused on surviving this moment, on keeping herself small and unnoticed, even as her spirit longed for freedom. Despite the fear and humiliation, she noticed small acts of kindness here and there. A man gave a nod of encouragement to someone he had rescued before. A woman shared a small piece of bread with another who looked weak. These small gestures reminded her that even in a cruel world, there could still be humanity. They gave her hope that someone might see her not as an object to be traded, but as a person with feelings, with courage, with a story worth knowing. As the auction continued, she felt a mixture of emotions, fear, shame, sadness, and a quiet determination. She remembered her own dreams, the small ones she had held onto even in darkness. She dreamed of a place where she could live without fear, where she could smile without guilt, where she could feel safe. The thought of those dreams made her chest tighten with longing. She whispered them silently to herself, a prayer to the universe that one day they might come true. Her turn approached faster than she expected. The room seemed to close in even more, the heat, the noise, the pressure pressing down on her. She could feel her body trembling, but she forced herself to stand tall. She refused to show weakness, to give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She remembered the lessons she had learned in the past, the power of silence, the strength in patience, the importance of hope. She clung to these lessons as if they were lifelines, pulling herself through the moment one heartbeat at a time. The auctioneer looked at her, his eyes sharp, scanning the room for the next bid. She could feel every eye in the room on her, weighing her, judging her. It was overwhelming, but she reminded herself to breathe, to stay calm, to survive. She thought of all the people who had gone before her, of the dangers they had faced, and she promised herself that she would not be broken in the same way. She would endure, she would hold on to her hope, and she would wait for the right moment, if it ever came, to be free. She could feel the weight of her past pressing on her, the memories of cruelty and loss that had brought her here. Each memory was a sharp reminder of what she had endured, of the life she had lost, of the people who had failed her. And yet within that pain she found a quiet strength. She had survived so far, she had endured the unimaginable, and if she could do that, perhaps she could endure this too. The room was a whirlwind of noise and movement, yet she found a small center of calm within herself. She focused on her breathing, on the quiet spark of hope that remained inside her, on the thought that someone, somewhere, might see her as more than a victim. She held onto that thought like a lifeline, refusing to let it go even as fear and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. And then, as if sensing her quiet determination, the room shifted. The crowd moved, the auctioneer paused, and she realized that all eyes were truly on her now. She felt the weight of their attention, the judgment, the expectation. And yet she did not shrink. She did not turn away. She stood tall, silent but not invisible, bruised but unbroken, trembling but determined. She had survived so far, and she would survive the rest of this day too. Even in the face of overwhelming cruelty, she found a small, stubborn flame within herself. A flame of hope. A flame of courage. A flame that refused to be extinguished. She whispered to herself quietly, her voice almost lost in the noise of the auction hall, "I will survive. I will endure. I will not be broken." And with that promise, she faced the cruel reality around her, ready to continue her journey through a world that seemed determined to see her fall. The room felt heavier as the auction neared its end. One by one, the others had been taken away, claimed by strangers who cared little for their lives, only for their value in coins. The woman remained standing, her body aching, her spirit weary, but her eyes still carried a quiet strength. Each second that passed felt like a test, as if the world itself was measuring her endurance. She had learned to stay silent, to observe, to wait for the smallest chance that life might offer a better path. Now that chance seemed almost impossible, yet she clung to the fragile spark of hope inside her. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the hall, calling for final bids, his tone sharp and commanding. "Last call," he shouted, the words echoing against the high walls. The people who had been taken earlier were forgotten, replaced in the minds of the crowd by anticipation, greed, and curiosity. She felt their eyes on her, some sizing her up, others sneering as if she were worthless. It was humiliating, and the weight of it pressed down on her chest. But she refused to let it crush her spirit completely. She reminded herself that she had survived worse than this. She had walked through shadows that would have broken most people. The room was full of movement, hands raising, whispers passing from one person to another, murmurs of excitement and disbelief. She noticed a man near the back of the hall, someone she had not seen before. He was quiet, different from the others. He did not shout or laugh at the cruelty around him. Instead, he observed calmly, almost as if he were searching for something or someone. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and in that instant she felt something she had not felt in a long time: recognition. Not pity, not judgment, but a sense that he saw her as she truly was, a human being, not an object, not a prize to be won. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and hope. Could someone really see her in this way? Could someone really care beyond the surface, beyond the bruises and the exhaustion? She had been let down before, over and over, and yet this small moment of connection sparked a quiet courage inside her. She lifted her chin slightly, straightening her shoulders as best she could, trying to show that she was more than the situation she had been forced into. She was still herself, even in this cruel place. The crowd was restless now. The auctioneer's eyes darted between the remaining bidders and the woman, his voice sharp as he encouraged them to place their bids. "Who will take her?" he asked, the words dripping with the cold logic of commerce. But the man at the back remained silent, his gaze steady. He seemed different, deliberate, careful. He was not rushing, not driven by greed or excitement. He was waiting for the right moment, and the woman, sensing this, felt a flicker of hope she had almost forgotten existed. The tension in the room was palpable. The other bidders hesitated, unsure, as if sensing that this moment was not ordinary. The woman's heart raced, her breathing quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. She could not afford to show fear, yet she could not stop the trembling in her hands or the tightness in her chest. She had spent so long hiding, enduring, surviving. And now, she wondered if perhaps something different could happen. Perhaps this man could see past her wounds and recognize her courage, her resilience, her worth as a person. Suddenly, the man raised his hand. The room seemed to freeze for a moment, the whispers dying down as eyes turned toward him. His bid was not loud or showy. It was simple, clear, and firm. He was not trying to win a game, not trying to impress anyone. He was acting with purpose, with intention. And in that moment, the woman realized something she had not allowed herself to believe for a long time. Someone had chosen her, not for profit or amusement, but for her humanity. The auctioneer paused, surprised by the bid, and the other bidders murmured among themselves. Some laughed, thinking it foolish, while others looked annoyed. unwilling to understand that this was not a normal transaction. But the man's calm resolve did not waver. He placed another bid, ensuring that the woman would not remain in the hands of the crowd. And as he did, the woman felt tears prick at her eyes. Not from fear, not from pain, but from the sheer relief of being seen, of being chosen, of being given a chance she had long thought impossible. She had learned to suppress her emotions, to hold them tightly inside, but in this moment a small crack appeared. She allowed herself to feel, to hope, to imagine a life beyond the auction house. The thought was dizzying, almost frightening. Could she truly be free? Could she truly trust that someone would care for her without wanting to hurt her? She did not know, but the spark of possibility filled her with a courage that she had not known she still possessed. The crowd, sensing that something unusual was happening, began to stir again. The auctioneer's voice was sharp, almost desperate now as he tried to continue the process. "Another bid?" he asked, his tone slightly shaken, but no one moved. The man's determination seemed to quiet them. He had made his choice and nothing else mattered. And in that silence, the woman felt something she had longed for years, safety, at least for this moment. She was no longer alone, no longer invisible. Someone had stepped forward, someone who refused to let the cruelty of the world define her. Her mind wandered to the possibilities that lay ahead. Could she imagine a life where she could sleep without fear, eat without anxiety, and walk through streets without trembling? Could she allow herself to dream again, to hope again, to believe that the world might hold kindness as well as cruelty? The tears she had held back for so long began to flow quietly, and she let them, not ashamed, not embarrassed, only grateful for the small miracle of being seen. The man stepped forward, approaching her carefully. His presence was calm, reassuring, and deliberate. He did not speak harshly, he did not command her to follow. Instead, he extended a hand in a gesture of trust, of respect, of recognition. For the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of being treated with dignity, of being valued as a human being. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she could trust, unsure if the relief was real. But the weight of exhaustion and hope combined, and she took his hand. The auctioneer called out the final words, sealing the deal, but for the woman, the world had shifted. She had been chosen not as property, but as someone worthy of care. She felt the warmth of the man's hand, the steady reassurance in his presence, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond pain. She was still bruised, still weak, but within her, a spark of hope had grown into a small flame. As they left the auction hall, the noise and chaos faded behind her. She walked with careful steps, leaning slightly on the man's support, feeling the tension in her body slowly ease. Each step was a small victory, a reminder that she had survived not only the horrors of the auction, but the long years of fear and neglect that had brought her here. Her mind was filled with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. She could not yet fully trust, but she could imagine trust, and that was a start. The streets outside were brighter, quieter, and almost unreal after the harshness of the auction house. Sunlight fell on her face, warming her skin, and for a brief moment she closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She realized that she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without fear, to move without trembling, to exist without constantly calculating the next danger. And in that realization, she felt something almost foreign, peace. She had survived, and now perhaps she could begin to live. The man who had chosen her walked beside her, silent but watchful, giving her the space to regain her strength while also offering protection. He did not speak of her past, did not demand explanations, did not ask for her gratitude. He simply acted with kindness, with patience, and with an understanding that human lives were not objects to be measured in coins. The woman felt a sense of relief she had not known in years. She was safe, at least for now, and that safety allowed her to begin imagining a life that might someday be hers. Even as fear and doubt lingered in the back of her mind, she allowed herself to hope. She thought of a future where she could rebuild, where she could heal, where she could reclaim the pieces of herself that had been stolen. The journey would be long, and the scars would remain, but for the first time, she believed that healing might be possible. And in that belief, she felt a quiet strength, a resilience that had been with her all along, now shining through the cracks of her past. The auction had ended, the noise had faded, and she was no longer alone. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, recognized, and valued. The world had been cruel, but one act of courage and compassion had changed everything. And as she took her first steps toward an uncertain but hopeful future, she whispered to herself quietly, "I am still here. I am still alive. And I will survive." The day after the auction, the woman found herself in a small, quiet home far from the noise and cruelty of the city. The sunlight streamed through clean windows, painting the walls in warm shades that seemed almost magical after the dark, harsh world she had left behind. She sat on a simple wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap, unsure of what to do next. For years, she had lived in fear, moving quietly, hiding constantly, never trusting anyone. Now she was free, and yet freedom felt strange, almost frightening. She had to learn what it meant to live without fear, to breathe without constantly calculating danger. The man who had rescued her did not rush her. He moved quietly around the house, carrying small items, preparing meals, and arranging the space so that it was welcoming and safe. He did not ask her questions she was not ready to answer. He did not insist on explanations or force her to speak about the past. Instead, he acted with patience and respect, understanding that healing could not be hurried, that trust had to grow slowly. His calm presence was almost comforting, though she was still cautious, unsure if she could truly rely on anyone again. Her body ached as she moved, the bruises and injuries from the auction still raw and painful. Simple tasks like walking or sitting were reminders of the violence she had endured. She felt exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Her mind wandered constantly to memories she could not erase, the faces of people she had seen sold, the harsh words of the auctioneer, the cold glances of the crowd. Those memories haunted her, and though she wanted to forget, she knew that she could not. Healing, she realized, would involve facing those memories, not running from them. The man prepared a small meal for her, placing it carefully on the table. She looked at it with hesitation, unsure if she deserved to eat, unsure if it was safe to trust someone offering kindness. Hunger gnawed at her, reminding her that her body had been neglected for far too long. Finally, slowly, cautiously, she picked up the food and ate. Each bite was small, deliberate, a quiet reminder that she could take care of herself again, that her needs mattered, and that kindness could exist in a world she had thought entirely cruel. Days passed, and the woman began to notice small differences in herself. She slept without the constant terror that had plagued her for years, waking to the sunlight instead of darkness and fear. She could walk through rooms without flinching at every sound, without expecting someone to yell or strike. Each day brought new challenges, a twinge of pain here, a wave of sadness there, but she faced them with a growing determination. Slowly, she began to trust the idea that life could be different, that she could exist in safety and dignity, and that kindness could be real. The man never pressured her. He offered gentle guidance, helping her tend to her wounds, teaching her simple routines, and providing small comforts that had once seemed impossible. He would sit with her in silence, allowing her to speak only if she wished, and often she found herself speaking, telling fragments of her story in hesitant pieces. He listened without judgment, never interrupting, never rushing, and in that quiet acceptance she found the courage to continue. She realized that the act of being heard without being judged was one of the most powerful steps in her healing. Even as she began to recover physically, her mind was often a battlefield. Nightmares visited her sleep, memories of cruelty and fear intruding into dreams that should have been peaceful. She would wake in panic, her body tense and trembling, her heart racing. Yet each time the man was there, not with scolding, not with impatience, but with calm reassurance, a steady hand on her shoulder, a voice that reminded her that she was safe now. Slowly, she learned that fear could be faced, that memories could be remembered without letting them control her, and that healing was a process, not a single act. The woman began to notice small joys she had almost forgotten. The sound of birds outside the window, the scent of fresh bread, the warmth of sunlight on her skin all became treasures she had once taken for granted. She smiled sometimes, a small, hesitant smile at first, then gradually larger as she allowed herself to feel happiness again. The house became a place of quiet comfort, a sanctuary where she could exist as herself, not as someone judged or sold, not as a shadow of her former life. She learned that even small pleasures could be powerful, and that gratitude for them could strengthen her spirit. Her thoughts often turned to the future. Could she truly live a normal life again? Could she trust people, form friendships, and even dream of love? These questions frightened her. She had been betrayed and hurt so many times that hope felt fragile, almost dangerous. Yet she could not help imagining a different life, one where she could walk freely, speak openly, and laugh without fear. Each small possibility built upon the other, creating a fragile but growing belief that she was capable of more than survival, that she could thrive. The man who had rescued her became not only a protector but a guide, helping her navigate the first steps of a life that was no longer ruled by fear. He encouraged her to care for herself, to speak when she felt ready, to try new things, and to explore the world cautiously but with hope. He never demanded gratitude or compliance, only patience, understanding, and respect. In his presence, she began to feel something she had thought impossible, trust. And trust, she realized, could open doors that fear had long kept closed. As the weeks passed, she began to take on small responsibilities around the house. She cooked meals, tidied the rooms, and organized simple routines. Each action, though ordinary, felt like a victory. She was learning that life was not only about surviving cruelty, it was about creating beauty, comfort, and stability. Every small success reminded her of her strength, her resilience, and her ability to shape her own path. Slowly, she began to believe that she could reclaim the pieces of herself that had been lost to fear, pain, and oppression. Even as she rebuilt her life, the shadows of the past lingered. She sometimes froze at sudden noises, flinched at sharp movements, or felt waves of sadness without reason. Yet, each time she faced these challenges, she grew stronger. She learned to speak about her experiences, to confront the fear instead of running from it, and to take pride in the fact that she had survived so much. Each day became a step forward, a reminder that her past did not define her future, that her courage and resilience were more powerful than any cruelty she had endured. Her body slowly healed, and with it, her mind and spirit began to follow. She discovered a rhythm in her days, a sense of normalcy she had not felt in years. She began to notice her own desires and dreams again, to think about the kind of life she wanted to live, and to plan for a future where she could be happy and safe. The wounds, both physical and emotional, would remain as memories, but they no longer controlled her. She realized that healing was not forgetting. It was learning to live with the past while moving toward something better. The man who had rescued her remained a constant presence, neither intrusive nor distant. He offered guidance, comfort, and patience, allowing her to regain strength at her own pace. Their bond was built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding, a relationship that grew quietly as each day passed. In him, she saw that human beings could be kind, compassionate, and selfless. This realization changed her perception of the world, teaching her that even in places of cruelty and suffering, goodness could exist. By the end of the first few months, the woman began to explore life beyond the safety of the home. She walked slowly through quiet streets, feeling the sun on her face, the wind in her hair, the grass beneath her feet. Each step was both terrifying and exhilarating, a reminder of how far she had come. She was still cautious, still wary of cruelty, but she allowed herself to experience joy, wonder, and freedom. She began to imagine a future in which she could help others who had faced hardship, to use her story as a source of strength, and to ensure that kindness and compassion could spread in a world that often seemed dark. Through all these changes, she realized that survival was only the first step. Healing, trust, and hope were the next. She had endured unimaginable pain, yet she had emerged with a spark of life that refused to be extinguished. She discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. And with each passing day, that courage grew, strengthened by the quiet acts of care, trust, and patience that surrounded her. The woman's journey was far from over, but for the first time she felt that she could face the future with confidence. She had survived the auction, survived cruelty, survived fear. And now she was learning to thrive, to heal, and to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. She whispered quietly to herself, a mantra that had carried her through so much: I am still here. I am still alive. I will not be broken. Time passed, and the woman's life slowly began to take on a rhythm she had never known. The bruises on her skin had faded, but the memories of her suffering remained, etched deeply into her mind. Yet she no longer carried them as a weight to crush her spirit. Instead, they became reminders of how far she had come, proof of her resilience and courage. Each morning, she woke with a small sense of accomplishment, grateful for the chance to live another day, to breathe freely, and to continue rebuilding her life. The man who had rescued her remained a constant presence, though he never imposed his guidance or control. Their relationship was one of quiet respect and understanding. He allowed her space to grow, to make decisions, and to explore the world at her own pace. He never demanded gratitude or loyalty. Instead, he offered patience, empathy, and unwavering support. Slowly, she began to see him not only as a protector, but as a guide who had shown her that human kindness could exist even in the harshest places. Her first steps toward independence were small. She learned to cook her own meals, maintain the home, and care for herself without relying entirely on anyone else. Each small achievement brought a sense of pride she had not felt in years. Simple actions, like walking to the market, carrying groceries, or tending a small garden, became symbols of her growing strength. She realized that life was not just about surviving cruelty. It was about building, creating, and finding joy in the ordinary. And for the first time, ordinary life felt precious and beautiful. The woman began to confront the memories of her past, allowing herself to speak openly about the auction, the pain, and the fear she had endured. Sharing her story was terrifying at first. Each word brought a flood of emotion, grief, anger, and even shame. But she discovered that speaking her truth gave her strength. It was as if naming the past allowed her to take control of it, to stop it from controlling her. She began to see that her experiences, though painful, had shaped her into a resilient and empathetic person, capable of understanding suffering and offering help to others. As trust grew between her and the man, she began to venture further into the world. She walked through quiet streets, visited small shops, and met people outside her immediate environment. Each encounter required courage, yet she faced it with a quiet determination that had carried her through years of fear. She learned that the world was not entirely cruel, that kindness existed even in unexpected places, and that she had the strength to navigate life with confidence. These small steps outside her comfort zone became milestones in her journey toward independence. One day, she realized she wanted to give back. She remembered the fear, despair, and loneliness she had felt, and she knew that others were suffering in similar ways. She began volunteering quietly, helping people in need, offering care and guidance wherever she could. Her experiences gave her insight that few others had. She could recognize fear, pain, and desperation in others and respond with empathy rather than judgment. Through these actions, she found a sense of purpose and fulfillment that had been missing for so long. Healing was not a straight path. Some days were difficult, filled with memories that returned uninvited. There were moments when fear gripped her unexpectedly, when the weight of past trauma threatened to overwhelm her. But she learned to face these moments with courage, using the tools she had developed over months of recovery, breathing exercises, quiet reflection, and the knowledge that she was safe now. Each challenge she overcame reinforced her strength and reminded her that her past did not define her future. Her relationship with the man evolved naturally. It was built on mutual respect, trust, and the shared understanding of life's fragility. She realized that not all connections were meant to control or harm. Some existed simply to support, guide, and nurture. Their bond became a steady source of encouragement, helping her face the world with confidence. He never asked her to repay him, never demanded loyalty, but simply existed as a reminder that kindness and compassion were possible, even in a world that often seemed cruel. Over time, she began to imagine a future she had once thought impossible. She thought about learning new skills, finding meaningful work, and building relationships with people who respected her. She dreamed of a life where she could laugh freely, travel safely, and pursue passions that brought her joy. These dreams, once fragile and distant, now seemed attainable. She recognized that hope was not just a fleeting feeling, it was a choice, a mindset, and an act of courage. By choosing to believe in her own future, she had already begun to create it. The community she joined welcomed her gently. She met people who had faced hardships of their own, yet they had found ways to rebuild their lives. Their stories, though different, resonated with her deeply. She learned that shared experience created connection, empathy, and understanding. She discovered that by helping others, she also strengthened herself, finding confidence, purpose, and joy in acts of kindness. The life she had once thought impossible was slowly becoming her reality. Education became a priority. She enrolled in classes, eager to expand her knowledge and skills. Learning, once a distant dream, now became a tool for independence. Each lesson, each skill she mastered, reinforced her belief in her own capability. She began to understand that her past suffering did not limit her future potential. Instead, it had given her insight, resilience, and determination, qualities that would serve her for the rest of her life. As she grew stronger, she also began to help others in similar situations. She worked with women and children who had faced hardship, offering guidance, support, and hope. Her story became a source of inspiration, a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and human kindness. She realized that her past, painful as it had been, could now serve a higher purpose. By sharing her experience, she could prevent others from feeling alone and show them that recovery and hope were possible. The woman learned the value of small joys and simple routines. She enjoyed walking in the morning sun, tending her garden, cooking meals she had chosen herself, and spending quiet evenings reading. Each of these activities, once unimaginable, became symbols of her reclaimed life. She discovered that happiness did not require perfection, but presence, gratitude, and the ability to notice beauty in the ordinary. These small victories reinforced her sense of self and allowed her to live fully in the present. Her relationship with the man remained steady, a quiet support rather than a controlling force. They celebrated milestones together. The first time she slept through the night without nightmares, the first successful step outside the home without fear, the first time she helped someone else who reminded her of herself. These small victories, though simple, carried deep meaning. They were proof that trust, patience, and compassion could change lives, and that her courage had not only saved her, but had also inspired those around her. Eventually, she realized that she was no longer defined by her past. The woman who had been beaten, humiliated, and sold was still alive, but she had grown into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. She had endured unimaginable pain and yet had learned to trust, to hope, and to rebuild. Her scars were not signs of weakness, but of survival. Her story, once one of despair, had become one of courage and triumph. By the time the first year had passed, she was fully independent. She walked freely through the streets, interacted confidently with others, and pursued her dreams without fear. She had learned that life could be cruel, but it could also be kind. She had learned that even a single act of compassion could change the course of someone's life forever. And she had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it every day and continue moving forward. As she reflected on her journey, she realized that she had gained more than freedom. She had discovered the power of hope, the importance of kindness, and the strength of the human spirit. She knew that her past would always be a part of her, but it would no longer control her. She had reclaimed her life, and with it, the ability to inspire others, to share her story, and to demonstrate that resilience and courage could overcome even the darkest circumstances. And so she stepped into her future with quiet confidence, ready to embrace the life she had once thought impossible. She carried her past with her, not as a burden, but as a testament to her strength. Each day was a reminder of what she had survived, what she had overcome, and what she was capable of achieving. The world had been cruel, but she had proven that one could rise above cruelty with courage, hope, and kindness. Her story ended not with despair, but with triumph. She had endured, survived, and thrived. She had been broken, but she had healed. She had been unseen, but now she shone with the quiet light of resilience. And as she moved forward, she carried a message for anyone who might listen. No matter the darkness you face, no matter the pain or fear, courage, hope, and compassion can light the way to a new beginning.